right? So we're talking about the underperformance of Afro-Caribbean men in particular. And Dane hit me up, was it yesterday?
Yeah.
And he had a particular bee in his bonnet, so I'm going to let him let that one out.
Yeah, I just think that like there just seems to be, as a part of this, going back to this whole IG culture, I just feel like there's a lot of times that there's a lot of false narratives and a lot of divide and conquer editorial that's being put onto social media, and it's not necessarily, we're not creating editorial where it's coming from necessarily. Some people are taking it and riding with it, or they're taking what might be a genuine issue and it's being sensationalized at the detriment, in this case, to Afro-Caribbean men. And so there seems to be a lot of continental African men who seem to now be referring to themselves as like a separate group to black men. And while at the same time conflating statistics that pertain to Afro-Caribbean men, but also include men of dual heritage who may have one Caribbean parent, and are talking about the phenomenon of Afro-Caribbean boys underperforming academically, even though for a very long time they were not performing as poorly as, for example, working class white men and Bangladeshis, as two groups that also underperform academically. And said that with Afro-Caribbean men make up one of the only groups that are lower earners than their women counterparts within their community. But what bothers me really is what seems to be some of the anecdotal explanations to this for this phenomenon, where it's like there seems to be a focus on street culture and materialism amongst Afro-Caribbean men, and there seems to be a focus on wanting to be good at music, and basically all of these ideas that are very rooted in very superficial stereotypes about Jamaican immigrants who form like the largest part of the British West Indian immigrant population from Windrush onwards. And for me, I just think that it's just very thinly veiled tribalism in some cases, people that are trying to stoke these diaspora wars. And I just think it's very inaccurate, because there is a lot of statistical and empirical evidence to support the fact that per capita, the University of West Indies turns out much more graduates than a lot of parts of the world. Caribbean nations have a higher literacy rate than that of America as well.
The statistics, I just want to say I agree with you, and it's very insidious. Good spot, bro, because within this narrative and these conversations that have been happening, I didn't spot that kind of separatist, insidious conversation happening between black men in general from African, like
continent,
from the continent, in comparison to Afro-Caribbean men, black men. I was just like, actually, and then when I started to think back, but I think about it, I think as well, a lot of that comes from their parents, in the people from the continent, their parents, and how they refer to Caribbean people in general. You know, like,
and a lot of times
hear it in the sketches. You want to be a Jamaican.
But a lot of the time they're not even referring to Caribbeans. They're referring to one group, Jamaicans, who form the largest population, but have a very distinct culture from the rest of the Caribbean. Because I've had conversations of a similar nature before, where I've been on like right-wing media outlets where they've been like, you know, maybe we should stop Carnival because of the Caribbeans that come, blah blah. And again, it's this like thinly veiled dog whistles. It's like Caribbean boys are coming and causing all these problems at Carnival. And I've had to remind people that the population of Grenada, where my family's from, is about 100,000 people, give or take. Even if every single one of us came to Carnival, we wouldn't even make up like 5% of the attendees. Even if you took into account the, you know, other nations like Tobago, Dominica, Antigua, St. Kitts, even combined, the combined population of these people would not be enough to make up the numbers of the people that attend Carnival. And for me, when people are discussing these phenomena, like, it's like they're removing the context of institutional racism, things like the the race report, which was like completely trashed because of the factual inaccuracies in it, and also is removing the fact that like there has been a concerted effort in the UK to deprive particularly Caribbean people in general of access to education, and surely anybody can understand in terms of cause and effect, if you are met with marginalization, with lack of access to resources, if your attempts to prosper are being suppressed, you're going to develop a traumatic or trigger response to academia and, you know,
or authority
in general. And there might be some validity to, or if people perceive there to be a reluctance of Caribbean men to learn, but it's also down to who's actually disseminating that information. And for me, I just think that, you know, maybe it could be just, you know, from a sense of being an individual, a lot of the stereotypes that people use to justify this denigration of Caribbean men, I can't relate to. So when people are like, well, the problem's in the home and the dads aren't there, I don't know, because my dad was there the whole time. And my parents always emphasized education. When people are like, you know, you grow up with these council estates, people want to be bad boys. Well, I don't know, because I didn't grow up in a council estate, so I don't know what. And that's not the experience for a lot of people I know. And even then, like, the absence of a paternal figure does not necessarily mean that you had no paternal figures in your life. And again, for me, it's the idea, it's this failure to take into account that there have been concerted efforts to marginalize Afro-Caribbean people, not just academically, but economically. So, for example, when people talk about like, well, why don't people have houses and blah, blah, blah? Well, because no blacks, no dogs, no Irish meant that you wouldn't have access to housing in the first place to even have a foundation to begin to accumulate and build generational wealth. If you go to a bank and you ask for a loan for a mortgage and 70% of the time you're told to fuck yourself, then you aren't able to begin having a foundation to build generational wealth. The comparison can be the same as a lot of black men, African Americans, served as veterans in wars. And then they had a GI Bill, which meant if you served as a veteran, you could have access to housing. But if you were a black American, they would tell you to fuck yourself. So again, having a foundation to begin generational wealth was not available to people. So when people are trying to make this equivalent comparison, for everybody else, as far as I'm concerned, for other cisgender heterosexual men, wherever diaspora they're from, whether you are from the continent, if you're continental African, Albanian, wherever you're from, a lot of the civil, academic, personal freedoms that you get to enjoy, you get to walk because Afro-Caribbean men crawled. An example being how galvanizing football is as a sport. Some of you man don't understand. You go and stand on those terraces at teams like Millwall or Chelsea or Liverpool, and someone will be dashing a bottle of piss in your head. And it's the resistance that was shown to by Afro-Caribbean men that allow you lot to now occupy and thrive in those spaces. It's all well and good and being like, oh, I go to school now, we do well in school and blah, blah, blah. When you're going to school and someone can run up in your school and punch you up because they're NF, there are people that formed resistance groups and interest groups and counter ideologies and counter movements that made it possible for you to even be in a space, like even academic space, and for you to be able to study safely.
So would it be fair to say that the issue that you're having is the fact that people are othering us as black?
They're othering us, and they're also removing context that Caribbean men do not struggle with literacy in the Caribbean countries that they come from.
Yeah.
They come here and they find themselves falling by the wayside. They find themselves being overrepresented in school expulsions, and people are not taking into account what the common factor is. That at home they perform well academically. They have academic aspirations, but since coming as part of the Reconstruction from 1948, part of Windrush onwards, there has been a problem where, and also a lot of the time, even when young Afro-Caribbean men prosper, there is very little attention that's paid to that.
Yeah,
because I'm reminded of like a kid like Romani Wilfred is a young St. Lucian kid. He has a IQ which is higher than that of Einstein's, but in the same way that we look at somebody like a Ian Wright of his time, and how that is celebrated and how that's presented as an aspirational archetype to Afro-Caribbean men and black men, they don't present someone like Romani Wilfred in the same way. And it makes you wonder if people are really truly aspiring for us to prioritize different aspects of our experience as British people. Why are different things put in front of us?
I think what I agree with everything you said. I'll start there. And I think what I see is, now that you've pointed it out to me, there is this kind of like othering of Afro-Caribbean men or men from Afro-Caribbean like descendants or are descendants of Afro-Caribbean people. And I'm not necessarily down for that anyway. For me, as far as I'm concerned, if we're black, whether you're from the continent or you're from the Caribbean, we're black, you know what I mean? So we've got the same fight. And to your point, where Afro-Caribbean men have afforded or enabled situations to be a little bit more softer. Man can come and live soft life, right? You get me? Man can go football matches and not get their head bossed by the wide boys or man from West Ham. You get me?
Even the term institutional racism exists as part of our common vernacular because of Stephen Lawrence being killed. Prior to that, if you brought up the idea that institutions could exist that show a racial bias to a group of people, you'd be laughed out the room.
Yeah.
So follow the McPherson report, that's even entered into common vernacular, that people even have a way to describe the level of marginalization they might experience in a certain space.
Yeah. But then I also feel like there is truth to what people say, not in the sense that we struggle with academics or academia, but in the sense of things like father not being in the home. You know, some of the other things that you've mentioned don't come to mind right now. But I think, and we had this conversation again, it's like a marginalized situation. It's very complex because you have so many little things attributing to the degradation of the performance of black Afro-Caribbean men in general, you know what I mean? So it's not just one thing happening at the one time, but I think what particularly bothers me personally is the way that it's been kind of portrayed, and kind of using these simple statistics, because there's a book actually that I read a couple of years ago called How to Lie with Statistics, and it's very interesting how you can hide the truth in such insidious ways using stats.
Yeah.
So I say that to say, like, you know, we need, and I would like to see a little bit more, and woe for me using this, because I don't want this from anyone personally, but as a community of black men, I feel like we need a little bit more compassion from our community as black men, rather than just kind of throwing, especially Afro-Caribbean men, to the fire and saying, "Look,
but things I don't think our communities do that, and I think that there's an element of sensationalism that some people buy into, excuse me, and are able to weaponize against us. Because if we were the only people that had estranged families, then the statistic that 40% of marriages end in divorce wouldn't be applying to us, because apparently we don't get married in the first place. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I think the separation of looking at like black continental African, black British continental and black Afro-Caribbean men makes sense in the context that we have different histories. And so if you're going to look at the narrative, as you've kind of pointed out, whilst obviously black people have been in this country for, you know, hundreds of years or whatever, if we're looking about kind of times of mass emigration into the country, Windrush being one of the key points, that doesn't really involve continental Africans in the same way. And I do think what you're saying is about, you know, coming and being the pioneers and, you know, facing the racism in the way that, you know, our grandfathers did is something that was quite unique to them in their history, and that's gone down the generation. I think there has been a shift that we need to recognize within the black Caribbean community, because Dane, you and I are around the same age, and I know that my elders, whether that be my parents, whether that be my aunts and uncles, whether it be like other, you know, black Caribbean people that I encountered, stay in school. That was the big thing, stay in school. That isn't the same thing now. And I think it would be remiss of us to kind of act as though that it's become diluted. And I think the difference is Nigeria is a way bigger country than any of the Caribbean countries. Ghana is a way bigger country. Those African nations are way bigger. So when they come en masse, they've got their culture, they've got their language, they've got their food, and they've got, you know, I know there are different ethnicities within Nigeria itself, but, you know, it's kind of that thing, whereas here we're like, oh, I'm from South, I'm from whatever, but when we go outside, no, I'm black British, like to everyone else, they can do that as well. And I think them coming over under different circumstances, when people had already laid the foundations, when they came over and a lot of them were educated as well, so you know, they weren't necessarily a skilled trade. Now they're coming over and they're lawyers and doctors, and they may be working as security guards, but they were lawyers and doctors, so they know you're going to school and you're going to university, where maybe some of our generation were tired as well. Like they'd been fighting the skinheads and the NF and all these other things. That's not to make excuses, but I do think that there's been a shift where there hasn't been as much of a focus on education like I felt from my elders when I was younger. That was a lot, like and we don't also have those intergenerational meetups as much as well.
And
you
I
know,
think that's a big problem.
Where you would see the elders and they would say, what you doing in school, you'd get money because you passed a test or you did things like that. Wasn't that focus. focus anymore. And
Or if you started acting up, you'd be sent to spend time with them. And
so you had the balance. You'd also get £5 if you could do the Running Man. But do you know what I mean? We had the balance. So you had those things going on, and then what you're having now, and there are little things that are affecting us. So you have the displacement where people aren't in communities anymore. The nuclear family, whether it doesn't matter whether the father, because we've always been matriarchal families in the Caribbean. We still are back there. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter. Obviously, the ideal is a father is there, but you've always had a situation where, whether it be for war or for work, a man has had to leave the house and a mother has been the matriarch. We've always had that. But what we're lacking is communities, because what we have is then people get moved out of the area, they're over here and they're isolated and they're this, and so the boy goes off the rails and they haven't got uncle whoever who's not really his uncle, but we've known him since, to kind of bring those people in line. And so that's been the decimation of those
spaces as well, like Saturday school. When I was a kid, we had like living in Lewisham, there was like St Mary's, was like
I
a
went
youth
to
club.
a Pan-African Saturday school when I was a kid.
It's interesting you mentioned that intergenerational kind of meetup. I think two things that I can identify very quickly coming from like being born in Birmingham in that, and not being like, I'm second generation British. So in that regard, I see the difference between how the emphasis of education on my mum versus the emphasis on education on me. And I find one of the reasons why, because my mum's an educated woman, but one of the reasons that I feel like education wasn't a massive emphasis to me personally was because my mum she was more focused on making ends meet.
Right.
You know what I mean? Rather than like emphasizing.
But I think there's an immigrant culture though. It doesn't matter what race you are. I think you'll find in any society you have this immigrant culture. So the first people come in and they've really got to try hard and they focus, like they know education is the way out. And so that would be your grandparents onto your mum, education. And then also you start to assimilate a little bit, and so actually if the local population is a little bit lazy, then you're kind of a little bit lazy as well, because I'm just like them, just because I'm and
there's a paternalistic aspect of the culture as well, whereby, like you said, if you are looking at your counterparts, your white counterparts or your white working class counterparts, they might still have a cut on it, but they still might have a comfortable standard of living. Because
let me just finish that thought, because while for my personal situation education wasn't a massive emphasis. It wasn't massive emphasis in regards to like going to uni. It was like go to school, education was like my mum emphasized education, school level, secondary school level, but it was kind of like after you finish education, formal education, get a job. And I think that was the thought process. There was no conversations about going to uni, whereas she attained to a certain level of wealth by the time she had the second set of her children. So she's got 4 kids, 2 elder set and within the elder set and the 2 younger set, and there's a vast difference. Both of them went to university. Both of them have gone on to do things like masters, and one's studying for a doctorate right now. So it kind of, and that was because my mum had the time to emphasize past.
And also, but also research it, because a lot of that's down to awareness.
But then, to go on to my second point, geographically, not everyone north of London had the same experience. I would consider myself quite lucky. Right. There are a lot of Afro-Caribbean men within the UK that didn't even even a second generation, because a lot of them are my friends, and there's no disrespect to them. But I feel like, I never grew up in the household with them, but in terms of aspirations, you can see that there wasn't a great emphasis on even aspiring past a certain space. You get what I mean? Yeah. And it's like when I go back to Birmingham and I see it, it makes me a little bit upset.
But I think it's understandable, because, like you said, I think that's all down to access and people. I just think the context has to remember that, like, Malcolm X and how he's regarded was told when he wanted to be a lawyer, be a carpenter. Yeah. Because Jesus was a carpenter. And these things can have an effect on you in terms of your environment. Like, looking at the creative industry, for example, there's a lot of black people that have massive aspirations towards being in the creative industry, but what we're not aware of in terms of access is occupying the peripherals of that industry, whereby everybody, for example, proverbially speaking, thinks about being in front of the camera, like being in executive positions, being in managerial positions. Those are things that were obscure to us for a very long time, because if you don't grow up in a certain environment, you will take a face value. Oh, that job shows a lot more social mobility. So then you have this holy trinity of I have to be involved in road, athlete, or rapper / actor. Whereas there are people from other cultures who may have the same aspirations, but they're doing it with the view of, how can I work towards being a commissioner? How do I work towards owning a media station? How do I work towards being a shareholder in the media or being involved in that?
Yeah.
And these are things that all come down to access. And that's why I say, like, it's fine. Like, example you gave your mother is that, like, as she got older and her horizons were able to be broader, then she was to understand the aspiration of my children can also be broader, because now they go towards a further education. But if you come from somewhere where, like, my mum came to the UK and she was like, we were ahead of everybody here because of how we're educated in we're dealing with the paternalistic influence of Victorian times on small islands, and education being emphasized. Her own geography teacher told her to go back and swing in the trees like a monkey. For me, when you're having that kind of experience in an academic space, it's very hard for you to begin to form a trajectory of how you're going to reach higher education.
And this is why I say it's so complex, because everything you've just mentioned there, everything from, not having access and not being afforded certain privileges or positions, or being told to swing from a tree, these are all of the marginal losses that we suffer from as a community.
Yeah.
So this is what makes it even more complex, because everybody's got a slightly different shade on the stories that, you know what I mean? And it might not be the same complexion. So it's like, going back to the point, for me, this is where I feel like compassion needs to be shown, because we need to understand that these marginal losses are happening and still happening to this day. You get what I mean? Because, one study in America, they did, and I reckon, and I'm going to speculate on this because it was an American study, but I'm going to say that I reckon it's the same thing that happens in the UK as far as black men are concerned. They had four men do, none of them had a criminal record. There's 2 white men, 2 black men, but one of the white men was assigned a criminal record, and one of the black men was assigned a criminal record, and they were told to apply for jobs, right? So the white men were something like, I think I've got it written down actually, I can tell you, yeah? So the white men got callbacks 34% of the time, and these are white men with no criminal records. White men with criminal records got callbacks 17% of the time. Now, saying that, it shows you that having a criminal record reduces your chances of callback for employment by about 50%, right? Black men with no criminal record got callbacks or offer of employment 14% of the time. In comparison to black men with 5% of black men with criminal records got 5% callbacks, basically. Now, I think that the madness out of that is you are less likely to get a callback as a black man
with a clean
record versus a white man who has got a criminal record.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at it plain as day like that, and because, I've got a couple of cousins that have changed their name, like midlife, changed their name to improve their chances of employment. My name is a pretty African name, even though I'm from the Caribbean. So it's like there is no avoiding it. And, I think that I do get discriminated on job applications, to the point, that's one of the reasons why I started my own business, because I just thought...
I agree that that's a problem. I agree all those things. I would probably think that the problem specifically in London would be less so with this than it is in America. I don't know about outside of London, but certainly in London, because I hire, like I have a team and I hire and I go through that process. So I do think it can be a problem. I think one of the things is, though, that two things can be true at the same time.
Right.
So we can have institutional racism, and we can have, a bias against people with African names or with foreign sounding names or whatever. But there's also a lack of access to resources to make sure that our CVs and our cover letters are what employers are looking for, and they are in the format that people are looking for. I think we've got a lack of knowledge, and it's not always being passed down. So had to say to people, you need to ask for more money. Like I've literally said to people, when you're going in, they've got more money than that, you need to ask for more money because they just don't know. And I think about it, when I first started working, I was 18. Well, I worked before that when I was 13, but like in the city, I was 18 and I started working at an insurance brokerage, and it was aviation insurance. And I had no idea about these things. So I felt like, and at the time in Lloyd's, so I used to go and broke in Lloyd's of London, there were maybe 4 black people in aviation, I think, and one of them was just a dark-skinned Asian guy. Like there was hardly anybody there, right? So everything I was doing was a first. And so when I have conversations with people, I would tell them the benefit of the mistakes that I made and the knowledge that I had. We don't always have that. And again, it's to do with those intergenerational conversations. I do think that when I see applications and CVs come across my desk, sometimes they're just not good enough. Like, and you may think that it's because you're black. And part of that may also be true in terms of your life story has not given you access to that information or to that resource to make sure it's good enough. Maybe you are good enough, but I can't see it from your CV. And a lot of the time I try to give people a chance and I'll try to interview them, but all of that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to interview someone that actually isn't good enough. And when you're
in a business as well.
Yeah, it's a lot. So I think we need to, I'm not discounting any of these experiences, but we also need to be open to the fact that there's a lot that we don't know. And I think sometimes being outside of the system isn't going to help us. I think sometimes you need to get into the system and have a seat at that table. And I think what we can do is, as a community, we can be quite defensive. And so we're like, nah, that's a Babylon thing. We're not gonna, like, we're not doing any of that, and we're not going to
Babylon's my favorite word.
you know what I mean? We're not getting involved in that, them Babylon thing. And everything like that. And so we discourage people from doing certain things, from studying certain courses. And actually, if you're going to change something, all empires fall from within. So if there's something that you want to go and change, you need to get in there and have a seat at the table and be that person and that voice that's doing those things. And I think at the moment we're not doing that for a number of reasons, but I think also we need to kind of think about tapping into, and there are lots of organizations and people that are trying to help young people to bridge that gap. And I think with it, when it comes down to like Afro-Caribbean and their attainment in school, I do think all of those things are the culmination, but I think we also have a lack of community. In the Black Caribbean community, there is a distinct lack of community. And so because you have that lack of community, you have that lack of guidance. And so that can, at different times, affect boys differently than it does girls. I'm not saying it doesn't affect girls, because I do think it does, but I think it affects boys differently. And so the issue is that is solved by men as well, because a lot of the pressure comes actually from men. And I know that you've pointed to, IG and talking about like women and these younger, I mean, like, as I said to you, get offline. Like, because in real life, broke men are winning. Like, they're out here and like living in their women's house and all like that.
You say that they're winning, but I think the problem with that is broke men, and broke men, and I'm gonna talk about my personal like visuals, that things that I see. Broke men don't necessarily lead from the front, and that doesn't create for what you're trying to solve for. You're talking about communities. It tends to be the men.
I'm just making the point, and I agree with you. And I'm not saying that anyone should aspire to be broke. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying this idea that women are just gold diggers, or they're always looking for this and looking for that. Isn't true. Do you know what I mean?
I use that as a light situation to just demonstrate what is going on online. But I think one second, and remember your point. I do think that there is a frustration within black women, genuine frustration within black women that is now starting to seep into the online space, where women are genuinely saying like, these men aren't doing X, Y, like, I'm tired now. You get what I mean? That kind of thing. And I can see their point, but my kind of retort to that is, not so much a retort, because it's not towards them. It's really, how can we as black men put ourselves up? How can we help?
But I think that's also something that I think women are coming into a place now where I think about when I was in secondary school and like the sexism that we like encountered, and even in I went to a girls' school, and there were things that were said that we couldn't do because we were girls. Like in a girls' school, that was still said, like, and it was quite an aspirational one. And so we kind of grew up in this kind of weird place where, you would wear your school uniform and still have to deal with like harassment on the way home from school from big men and all of these kind of things. And we've gone through all of these times now where there's been like this pushback towards it, and women have benefited a lot in the space that actually now, you know what, we did stay in school and we did get the education and we did get the job and we stuck with it, and then we've got some money and we've got our own money and we've got our own freedom, and so now we're saying actually you need to come with something different. It's not even just because misandry, as people like to call it, when, you know, women want to date up for their social circles, that was a way of life, because women, you know, in the 70s or whatever, couldn't even have their own credit cards and all of these other things. So it was actually a necessity. It wasn't about trying to kill men. It was actually a way that they could survive. Now they have that kind of more of financial autonomy. What they're saying is, I don't need you to provide that. So you need to figure out who you are and come with something different. And yes, I want you to have financial security, but I actually don't need you for that anymore. And I think that's where it's wrong fitting men, because they haven't necessarily evolved at the same pace that women have in their own lane.
That's a good perspective. I didn't consider that.
No, it's true. I think it's, and again, like I said, obviously you simplified it in saying, like, you know, broke men are winning, but what it really means is that it's like men are not able to, you know, offset their personality or other aspects of their shortcomings by just saying, but I've got money though.
Yeah, exactly.
So because I've got money too, so I'd have to put with your shopping just because you've got money.
100%.
That's really what it is.
And for some men, it's like, well, what do I do now?
Because some men ain't got
that's what
nothing
I
else.
was supposed to do. I was supposed to be the guy with...
I would count that as another marginal lust, though, because I don't feel like that's the case in all spaces.
What do you mean?
In the sense of men trying to offset by having money, you know what I mean, and just not being able, not having other things to bring to the table.
But I think that the problem is a lot of men are being taught that this is how they counter what's you know, how people refer to it as the wave of like third wave or fourth wave feminism, or the empowering of women financially. A lot of men are being taught the only way to counter that is to have more money, and they've been taught in a very irresponsible way. But I think what's been quite positive in this dialogue is that, like, we have gotten to the root cause, which I think is the lack of community, and there's a lot of the aforementioned subjects we talked about have contributed to that, in that financial aspiration, particularly for men, comes at a certain level of individualism and isolation. Because the higher the rungs you climb, the less people you see that look like you. Because I would look at somebody like, you know, is it Dean Forbes, who was like on, you know, rich list as one of the most influential black people in the UK. You know, who's a Caribbean, and I look at somebody like Lewis Hamilton, who's you know, been in a space which has been so historically elite and white for so long. Like, that must be, you must get some kind of racial vertigo from being around that level of whiteness, where, you know, people like, you're a fucking race car driver and you're amazing and you've achieved all this stuff, and people are like, I just don't like him and blah blah blah. And I think that, you know, these are, again, amazing examples of trailblazing, but there are some sacrifices that do come with that, and without a certain element of community. And I think what happens is, in the vacuum of guidance that is left when there isn't community in terms of being able, because, like, for example, I only know one black Caribbean person who's a friend of mine. He's a teacher. And that can be one of the most valuable resources that we have in our community, because he will spend more time shaping the minds of other young Caribbean men than your average rappers or athletes and all the rest of it. But again, it's like, can we honestly say we have an environment where that kind of status is celebrated, where an actual black academic is celebrated? And the truth is, we don't necessarily have that. And that might be due to the fact that we have assimilated so much in capitalism, giving us these more shallow displays of success, that it's like, well, you don't look like you're rich, so what am I listening to you for? Like, I even used to hear Carla say stuff like, he'd be rapping and obviously he's trying to elevate people's consciousnesses by talking about stuff there, but he'd even be like, I own a Mercedes. And I don't think he's trying to flex, but it's just that even he is acutely aware of the fact that if you don't even reference the material wealth you've accumulated, you can't key into people who have been weaned on capitalism while at the same time being on the fringes of it. And I think that's that. And I think even having someone that, beginning to have someone that access to that, has caused a large amount of division, where part of the inferiority, superiority complex you can have as a black man is that all that money means to you is a way of distancing yourself from the poverty you may have grown up in, or having it to lord over other Caribbean men. Because it's like, I look at someone like Floyd Mayweather, for example, arguably one of the most decorated boxers of all time, arguably one of the greatest. But the way he shows off his wealth, it's like, I only know you're trying to impress man from the hood, because you can't impress rich white people like that. They won't be impressed by that. So why is there this need to prove this to people? Like, I don't know why you need 12 Rolls Royces, especially because you don't get to drive them all the time.
But it isn't even just about impressing though, because it's like, well, who cares whether we impress white people? But also, even about the hood, it's about saying I'm better than you. That's what it is. I think I don't think that he wants them to be. He wants them to know I'm not like you. I'm better than you. Yeah. And this is inherently one of the problems that we have, is that we're kind of searching for these material wealth to say that we're better than this or than that. And
I'd say that goes back to how you brought this conversation up, that othering, you know what I mean? There's a lot of othering within the community.
But that's what happens though. When you get mature in a system of capitalism, as you try to kind of move up the rung, and no one is gonna, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, right? So whatever we're doing is kind of, we're feeding into this beast that's kind of also oppressing us. And so once you become a part of that machine, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to always need more to feed the beast, and there has to be people on the bottom rung, and you have to look down on them for it to function, for it to kind of fulfill you in that way. And that's why I say go to the park and do a sports day, because you need to find pleasure in those other things. Otherwise you just get caught up in it. And I think when you're talking about, I'm not a man, so I can't really speak for men, but you hear a lot about like male loneliness and all of these other things. And I think that's the problem, is that you're getting caught up in this capitalist society, whether you think your value is linked to how much you've earned or how much you've hustled or how many and how many women that's attracted and whatever. And actually, have you spent time and just hung out with your friends or people that bring you joy, or your family?
Some of these men are being taught that their solitude is linked to their masculinity.
Yeah,
like you've got to be an alpha male, but I'm a lone wolf and blah blah blah. And we're a social species, and it's even down to like, I think there's even elements of exchanges I've seen with men where their pride alone is like, I can never apologize to no man, so you're gonna be by yourself. In your house,
we don't have much time left. We got a couple of things that we need to go through. But Z, I just wanted to ask your quick opinion on some things. You mentioned two things about us not having the knowledge or access in certain spaces. So two things. When do we know, and let's try and cover this as quick as possible. Okay. How would you know, if you're applying for a job, how would you know that you could get paid more? And two, where can we get access to improve our CVs? How can we know like where
so what I would say, and I've just given this advice to my niece, actually, there's a few things. I won't read what I've said to her, but
we can put them in the show notes. So if you send them to
me, but one of the things I would say is that you need to be on LinkedIn, depending on what kind of job. But most jobs, like certain jobs, you're going to need to be on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, you will find someone in that company. Reach out to people. If you're applying for a job, reach out to people and ask if you can have a discussion. First of all, about the type of environment and work environment that you're going to be in. But you can also find there will be like networks and stuff like that on LinkedIn. By the way, I hate LinkedIn. Like, I find it so precocious, but it's actually really, really useful. And I just have to say that because it's so cringe. But if you go on there, so for example, say you were looking for, I don't know, a job as an analyst in a bank, right? And you're looking for one at JP Morgan, I don't know. You may look through JP Morgan and you may find someone that went to your university, or you may sign whatever, and you can be like, I'm looking for this job and whatever. Have a conversation with those people. You could also go and find someone in a network, say if they have black bankers networks or whatever, that is an analyst on LinkedIn, and just say, look, I'm applying for a job in another bank. Can you let me know what you think the salary should be or what I should be going for? Would you mind having a lot of people will do that for free, like that, and just you can hit them up. It's not like weird. I think there are restrictions on how many people you can DM for free or whatever, unless you're connected, but just connect with them. I think we don't like have careers advisors and proper people like that in schools and stuff like that anymore. But I think go in and find those networks and find those people and take the initiative. And if you're applying for a job, they sometimes have on LinkedIn, they'll say what the hiring manager is or the talent manager. They'll tell you who posted the job. DM them and say, can I have a chat about this job? That also puts them in your brain, like you in their brain, because they're like, oh, that person actually contacted me. Okay, cool, yeah. And what kind of things are you looking for? Adapt your CV accordingly. Another little trick I saw on Twitter the other day, I thought was great. A lot of CVs are being screened by AI. So this woman said that she copies the job description, makes it really, really small, turns it white and puts it on her CV. CV. So if they screen it, the words will still come up because it's still there, even though you can't see it. And then she'll get passed and she'll get an interview. Yeah. So there are like different things like that. Also, and this is again not to advertise TikTok, but on TikTok, if you get on the right algorithm looking for work stuff, they'll show you little tips and things like that. Getting a job is work, right? It's a lot of work. It's not just about sending any old standard CV. You need to tailor it and you need to take time to do that. And I think sometimes we're a little bit lazy and we don't want to put in that work and do that. But you make those efforts and that's going to make your CV stand out because now you've put the key words that are in that job description into your CV. They're going to go, okay, cool. Yeah, let's get this person in for an interview. And then practice. Now we've got like these large language models like ChatGPT and whatever. So put that job description into ChatGPT and say, what kind of questions would you ask me if I was going for a job? And then practice answering them, practice the flow. You want to get in there and you want to, like, all of these things are really important, but people just think, oh, I've sent my CV off. Hopefully I'll get an interview.
Cool. So, that speaks to a bit of community as well, which is what we've been talking about. Another thing that is really community-led, and something that Dane, again, was hitting me up about, the stuff going on in Burkina Faso and the wide coverage of it. To which you are very happy and proud, but also laughing because you know we've been talking about this from since...
Well, at the beginning of the podcast, we've been speaking about it. And
but before you go, I do want to preface it with this, right? I laugh at these things. I really shouldn't because people might think that I'm just being insensitive, but I'm not. It's just so stupid and dumb. That's what makes me laugh. But I say that to say this. What's going on in Gaza, right? I saw an interview with Donald Trump where the reporter was questioning Trump and suggesting that the US will buy Gaza. And Trump's response was, oh, there's no need to buy it. We're going to take it. And the reporter was like, what do you mean? How are you going to take it? Like, surely you'd buy it. Like, there's nothing to buy. We're going to take it. And the reporter said, under what jurisdiction? And he said, under the US, no, under America's jurisdiction, we're going to take Gaza. Now, I say that to say this when I relate it to Burkina Faso. And in the same way that I said in the last podcast, I feel like our community gets pushed around in the UK and in these Western countries in the same way that these large governments and countries push around our nations. If we don't take, this is the playbook, if we do not take Gaza as an example, this is the sort of thing that they will do to Burkina Faso. Because they've already started with the propaganda windmill talking about, you know, what Ibrahim Traore is purported to have done with gold and, you know, stockpiling gold. And we've seen this before. We've heard this before, even from the days with Haile Selassie and when he went into exile and all of them things. So I say that to say, I feel like this is the same playbook happening again. But with that said, what do you... And George Galloway, oh my gosh. Carry on, bro. Did you see that?
No, I haven't even seen it.
My man went mad.
Yeah, well, I think that obviously we've seen a lot of geopolitical shifts, and I think that we're seeing we're in the outro song of the Song of the American Empire. And I think that it seems that they are again trying to fight wars on the fronts that have no real ideological basis. And on the other hand, maybe we're seeing, as we have throughout the Trump administration, just the true face of America that, alternate news outlets and as well as conspiracy theorists and anti-imperialists have been saying for a very long time. And I think that America has allowed the veil to slip. And when we said the emperor's not wearing any clothes, but the emperor's fine to just bop around swinging his things. And I think a lot of people probably have enough of it. I think that there's a lot of populist claims being made by Donald Trump. I'm not sure if he is as aware of how thinly he's spreading his empire as he thinks he is. I think that, America already have a $1 trillion bill from the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, which did not achieve its objectives. I think.
But they don't have to pay that back, though, do they?
Well, they technically don't have to pay it to those nations, but the private interests that are now based there and have supplied them with the weapons for these wars, they'll have to pay that. Or America's taxpayers will have to cover that bill.
And that what they'll do is just print another $1 trillion.
Well, we'll see, because obviously if they say the American taxpayers have to do it, then there might be a knock-on effect to that. But I think, again, yeah, as we've discussed many times on this podcast, I think seeing the whole Sahel alliance and how that is beginning to throw off the I guess the chains of European imperialism, at least, is leading to a much larger conversation on the continent. There have been a lot of protests in support of Ibrahim Traore, and I think that
in and outside of Africa,
like
all over the world, as far as the black community is concerned.
Exactly,
especially.
And I think that nowadays we live in an era which has a lot more visibility, and even though you could argue that there is maybe we're probably at a time of a critical mass of media, but there's also access to media nowadays where we no longer have to take for face value what we are being told by the Western media and obviously Western leaders. And I think that's having a massive ripple effect. And let's see if the snowball becomes an avalanche. But I can't see that this is going to go the way that I think a lot of the historic world leaders have intended. And as we said before, like, I think that Ibrahim Traore is one of the most important leaders, if not the most important leader in the world right now.
And you know what? I will say Dame was particularly happy. So for all the influencers within our community that wasn't covering this story before, and you started to, Dane was happy about that. So
because that's the other thing as well, is that it's really interesting that, like, obviously since the start of the podcast, we're not like that short of analytics and what's been going on, but we've been speaking about like the Sahel Alliance and Ibrahim Traore and Burkina Faso for a very long time, and obviously him being joined by leaders of Mali and Senegal and their removal of French imperial powers. And this has happened at a time where a lot of other outlets talking about community have not been prioritizing these massive movements that are taking place that are, very close to our community. Whereas now, as these movements begin to gather a lot more steam and coverage, we're seeing a lot more outlets covering this in ways where they were talking about more like YouTube boxing and dating and who should pay, and a lot of the balloon, exactly, a lot of the IG narratives that we were talking about before, which are false representatives of the culture. It's interesting to see this shift now where people are speaking about stuff that may have, real economic and ideological ramifications to the global diaspora.
We are short of time, but Z, I wanted to get your leaning on this a bit. Have you been been looking at this? Have you been?
I haven't been following it closely, but I've seen a few articles and stuff coming up. I think it's a really interesting time, because whenever something like this happens, in the past we were on the back foot about it. Like you had to wait for journalists to cover it or it to come out and whatever. And now one of the things you mentioned, Gaza, that came out of Gaza, is that we're getting it in real time from people on the ground. And this is the opportunity that we have now to get real stories from real people on the ground in a way that we really didn't have access to that information before. And thinking about how we deal with these kind of stories when they're coming out of these places. Again, a lot of the online space is given over to the pop the balloons and the this and the that and the culture wars and woke or whatever they want to do now. And how do you build that narrative and those stories that are actually really important to our community as a wider diaspora, but also just as an insight into the evils of imperialism and how that impacts people? Because I think one really interesting thing that I've seen is that as we are traveling more, whether it be to Dubai or whatever, but specifically when we go to the continent, we need to be careful of our imperialist footprint that we have over there as well. And I think we're going over there and we're not thinking about, we think we know better than the people that are from there, and we want to create these communities that exclude them. And so don't be the gentrifiers that you hate over there to those people. Big point. I think that's really, really important about keeping those connections alive so that we hear from those people and those voices that really matter, and we're not going over there and being the white man to them people over there as well.
Nah, that's a massive point. I just wanted to cover three things that over the last couple of days that I saw that I found massively hilarious. So George Galloway had a black American, I think he was an economist, but I could be wrong, on a podcast, and he referred to, and he actually said the words, he referred to Michael Langley, who's the head of African, who, if you don't know, is the guy that's spearheading the charge to try and invade Burkina Faso and dethrone Ibrahim Traore. So Michael Langley was referred to as a house Negro by George Galloway. I was bossing so much shots. It was what a bad man.
I've been on George Galloway's show as well. He's a special type of guy, boy. Yeah.
George Galloway, you got a round of applause from me, boy. That was a sick performance. You get me, like that.
I didn't see that, so I'm like, but I know that, like, I mean, I think sometimes people get to a certain age as well, and they just don't give a fuck anymore. Do they? Really, they're just gonna say whatever they think, and you know, let the.
Well, he did his thing because he won his seat as well, innit, independently. So
like
can't tell him nothing.
Literally.
And his wife's I think his wife's from Suriname as well. So he's on one.
Man, when he said, you know, he actually said his words were, it might sound strange for a white man like such as myself, and weird for me to say this, but I'm gonna say it, like this house Negro. And then he went on to describe how he's doing all this, like Michael Langley's doing all this stupidness. Second thing, Burkina Faso have banned second-hand clothes coming from America. So that might help with the waste and landfill of.
It's fantastic.
Unwanted.
'Cause it allows for the domestic textile industry of Burkina Faso to have a fighting chance, and also it reduces waste, because obviously when we talk about donations, we're talking about fast fashion, which is caused massive ecological damage to the continent, particularly in Ghana, coastal like Somalia and stuff as well. And even I think in Rwanda, Paul Kagame quite a few years ago also said no secondhand clothes to go to Rwanda. Secondhand refugees though is fine apparently.
Although Rwanda, small win for I have to say small win for the US in Rwanda as far as Rwanda and Congo is concerned, where Marco Rubio seems to have brokered this deal where Rwanda, and I say that in quotes, are saying that they're going to stop funding the militia that's been invading Congo because now this whole peace agreement's been struck. I just think it's bullshit because they're not funding anybody. This has been funded by Western powers. So small win for the US there. And as far as the geopolitical chessboard is concerned.
But is it though? It is, you know, the US have been known for putting money into splinter groups and destabilization projects that don't always work out for them. Like, for example, when they financed the Mujahideen against the Russians during the Soviet-Afghan war, and that same Mujahideen went on to become Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, but more often than not, they are successful in attaining to some of their agendas. And in this case, what they're trying to do is get access to the minerals in Congo. And they're not even trying to hide it anymore. They're saying, we're going to give you defense, you give us minerals. And I mean, I've said it, Ibrahim Traore needs to get down there quick, and he should be the one that's brokering this deal.
It's interesting because it's something that he has spoken about for a very long time, and his more notable predecessor, Thomas Sankara, was actually responsible for renaming Burkina Faso, because its colonial name was Upper Voltaire. It was given to him by the French, and he changed it to Burkina Faso, which is I think it's the word translates to the upstanding people. But Thomas Sankara was going to lead a delegation into the Congo in order to nationalize those resources, since they were the basis of the fourth industrial revolution.
Let's hope this can be a thing. And the last and final thing I wanted to mention about, because you mentioned about the Russian Cold War, Burkina Faso awards Russian company Nord gold mining contract. And, you know, I guess this is another way of saying you help us with defense and we will give you. But I think what the Russians have historically done is actually done better business with the continent.
The Southern Hemisphere. I mean, they worked with Castro, and then Castro provided troops to, I want to say, Angola during the war, when the apartheid regime was trying to invade Angola and Namibia as well. And
Che Guevara was over there in the same period,
Mozambique and Angola. So they helped send Cuban troops there to help them against imperial forces there as well. Obviously worked very well, alongside Maurice Bishop prior to the invasion of Grenada in 81, so 82 I think it was. So
I mean there's a lot more to discuss, but we unfortunately don't have the time, so I'm going to close up. Thank you, Z, for joining us.
Thank you. Very
insightful. You know, it was good. It was good to hear your perspective and point of view as far as the budget's concerned, and also your leaning on every other subject that we discussed today.
I think in particular, obviously, always good to see you, Z. Love you like cooked food.
You.
I think that if you would be willing, we'd love to have you as a guest, particularly in terms of, I found the information for employment to be particularly
Okay.
helpful. And I think for a lot of young people,
Yes.
some of their, like I said, just discussing in terms of resources, some of their parents may not
Yeah.
have that information or have access to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, any of those updates on how to, especially new emerging technologies
Yeah.
that can assist. I think any information that we can.
We'd love to have
pass
you
on.
back, you know.
Yeah,
if you're,
basically.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
So is there anywhere we can find you?
Until then, yeah.
South. No, I'm joking.
Come to the ends.
Come to the ends.
Not
I'll be
via the
around.
Blackwall Tunnel.
I'll be on the block. No, yeah, you can find me on TikTok, The Reluctant Accountant, Instagram, the same handle, and I'm also on YouTube. Yeah, and I'm
sick.
restarting my podcast again. I took a little break because life was lifing, but yeah, I'm gonna get back in the studio soon, so we're gonna kind of have some new episodes coming out. It's gonna be great.
Sick. Dane.
Yeah, as always, just look up Dame Baptiste on all your good socials. Look up for some more gigs. Taking the game international, so I will be doing a tour towards the latter part of the year. So covering London, Liverpool,
And Gibraltar.
maybe. See how it goes. Listen, if the bread's there, I'm there. You get me. But someone's got to plant the flag. But yeah, I'll be
What flag
in.
are you planting?
Well, this is it. It'll be the red, black, and green one. But yeah, I'm going to be in Copenhagen this weekend, and then in the next couple of weeks I'll be at Club Haug in Rotterdam. So if you're about in the Netherlands, you can come check me out there. And in the meantime, just check out more content online. And check out my special on YouTube as well. The chocolate chip is available, so watch that. And keep watching the episodes of the podcast as well.
Sick. Yeah, and you can find Mind Your Business podcast on all socials and MYB_pod UK. And as always, you can find Index Nowhere. And with that, respect and love. And man, we'll
Peace.
catch up.
Thank you.
Yeah.